much of our staff team during COVID has been that content is easy, but that community is hard. And I think that you've all probably experienced that reality because, your classes obviously, and maybe even church, obviously cat videos still online. And it's relatively easy to upload content online now. There's so many different services and platforms, but I think COVID, at least for me, and I'm guessing for you too, has made it really clear that developing like authentic, trusting, honest community where you could say like, okay, these people, they really know me. Like they actually really know my life. They know not just what I'm doing, but they know what I'm experiencing and they can relate to that in a meaningful way. And where you could also say, I really know them. They're my friends. That's really hard, just digitally when that's so much of our existence. And we get that as a staff team, as a ministry, and we don't want to contribute to the notion that just common kind of engagement with content is the same thing as growing as a community, that everybody engaging together over the same live stream or this Zoom call, even to some extent, is the same thing as actually growing in community with other people. But we also want to be really realistic about what we can and can't do in this season of ministry. And the reality is that meeting in person for large group meetings, it's not really safe right now. And it's also not allowed by city ordinance and then by Miami policy by student orgs. So for the most part, we're pretty constrained on using digital forms of connection. And so with that in mind, we're trying to do what we can to make the most of that while still keeping those tensions, in balance with each other. And that's why this semester for Thursday nights, we're really trying to balance out what the Thursday night rhythm looks like as a ministry. And we want it to try to feel rhythmic because I do think that I heard a teacher, pastor one time ask the question, like, what's the difference between noise and music? And I think at baseline level, it's rhythm, that there's some structure that's kind of put around that. And that helps create meaning and purpose to what noise and sound we're hearing. And likewise, if there's a rhythm to the times and the places and the ways that you're engaging with other people, with spiritual disciplines, with practices that help move you towards one another, that can actually help those things not just be noise of common engagement, but actually become rhythms that help to develop community and growing life there. And it's important what those are, though. And so that's why this semester, this is what we're going to plan to look like. Jordan already alluded to this. I'm going to shrink down here. Woo. So again, Jordan alluded to this. The first week of every month is going to be a NavNight like this on a Zoom meeting. It's kind of everybody together, but there is a little focus to something that we're going to talk about together. The exception is April because there's 5 weeks. So actually the first 2 nights, we're going to do a special kind of bonus night, the 1st of April, talking about relationships. And then the next week, we're going to dive into talk about time management for the kind of the month of April there. The second week, we're going to put out actually a podcast every month this semester called Rediscipleship. And you'll hear more about that in a little bit. I think we'll be sending out information in the weekly and other places to help you find that. But that's going to be a conversation around the topic we explored at NavNight with me and kind of a guest speaker. And then there's going to be an opportunity starting tomorrow for you to actually submit questions based on what we talked about tonight that we can follow up with during that podcast. So it becomes hopefully participatory for you and really practical for you to engage with that. And then the third week, we already mentioned this first month in February, we're doing a trivia night. So there's kind of a social aspect to that. And that's something we're happening together, some, all at the same time on Zoom or some other format. And then week 4, there's not going to be anything to engage with in person or online like this on that 4th Thursday. But we're going to put out a few just kind of reflection prompts or questions, again, off of kind of the monthly topic that you can personally reflect on, or you could bring into your Bible study if you wanted to process with a friend or roommate or people in your Bible study. So that's kind of the trajectory there for moving into this semester. I hope that makes sense. I'll stay on the call after everything's kind of wrapped up. If you have any questions on that or other thoughts, Go back here to a blank screen. But that gets us to tonight. And we're talking about technology. And this is interesting. The way I have this set up, it's hard for me to see everyone. And so I'm going to try to keep the something up here so I can actually like know that there's people here too. I gotta say, I'm kind of proud of myself with this, but I know this doesn't put some people to. Some of you are going to critique my coding in this, but that's okay because I'm not a coder. Technology is changing you. That's the title of tonight. Okay, and I think by the end of this, you may already have a concept of what this means for you, what technology means to you. But I wanted to like really quickly in 1 minute show you. I think some of the drastic distinctions between you as Gen Z, Generation Z, and myself as a millennial. And so when I went to college, I started college in 2016. And at that time, there was no Wi-Fi in the dorms. There was Wi-Fi on the center of campus in the classrooms, but not in the dorms. And so in order to get Wi-Fi in my dorm room, we had to use this thing called an Ethernet cable that you like plugged into a little hole in the wall, and then you plug. Okay, and then that was about the year after Facebook first launched. So I remembered before that having a MySpace page. That was a whole thing that you may have never even heard about, but it was definitely a thing. Zanga was also a thing back then, but nobody cares about that anymore. And then Christy and I were talking about this when Christy and I started dating. My wife Christy and I in college around 2009. If we were going to talk during a month, because she was on her family's phone plan, we only had a certain number of text messages that we could use before we started getting extra charges on the phone plan. And unlimited plans were not a thing then. So like you had a counter on your phone and you would have to go into your settings and check how many texts have I used this month and make sure that you didn't go over. And it was like 150 or like 100. So like if you could pull up your phone right now and you looked and see how many text messages you'd sent, probably some of you would like max that out just today. Like, so I recognize I'm coming from a different experience of college than you are. But that being said, I'm still living in the technology saturated world that you are right now. And I think that there are some needed and meaningful things that we all need to be either made aware of or have a moment of pause and reflection to really take seriously on how technology has an implication for our life. So with that, I'm going to move forward. I have a few quotes in here that I wanted to share with you. This first one, I'm going to read this. You can see it on the screen, or if you have the document open, you can read that. I'm going to read this and then one other quote, and then I'd like you to discuss that in the same small groups you were in just a little bit ago. But let me read this one. So this was a guy named Kevin Shute. Wrote a book called Of Games and God. And if you are into video games, this is a really good read. It's a helpful read from a Christian perspective about video games. But he says, so this is a quote, "Video games are not understood by the present generation of adults. They are new. They make an enormous appeal to children, and they present ideas and situations that parents may not like. Consequently, when parents think of the welfare of their children who are exposed to these compelling situations, they wonder about the effects of the games upon the ideas and behaviors of their children. Do the games really influence children in any direction? Are their conduct, ideals, and attitudes affected by the games? Are the parts which are objectionable to adults understood by children, or at least by very young children? Do children eventually become sophisticated and grow superior to games? Are the emotions of children harmfully excited? In short, just what effect do video games have upon children of different generations?" He puts this quote into his book, and I would like to see in the chat. He's pulling this from another source and then including it into some of his discussions there. And I'd like to see if you'd post in the chat the year that you think this quote was written. Okay. Good thoughts. Most people are saying like probably early 2000s, at least somewhere around there, a couple 80s references there. I think you're all going to be kind of surprised by this, actually. And I could have said he did the highlighted green words there. He did change from something original. That wasn't the original text of the quote. The original text is actually from 1933, referencing when films were started, like movies, pictures, moving pictures, way back in the day. Okay, so this is feels like if this is a sentiment that we could attribute to like the early 2000s at best, I think we can recognize that like as humanity, even, or just as people, the way that we engage with new technology that feels maybe unfamiliar or just has a very misunderstood or just not understood effects on humanity, it's kind of the same. Not a lot's changed necessarily from then. So I found that really profound. And if there's some things that resonate there, I'm going to encourage you at a point in a little while to just have a moment of reflection. So if you do have like a sticky note or a piece of paper or something, and there's something that kind of pricks you or intrigues you, just jot that down. We'll pause in a little while to kind of capture some of those thoughts. Everyone was old the entire time, Justin. So this is another quote I wanted you to consider. And now I have too many things open on my screen. I got to move this around so I can actually see it. Technology must never be accepted as part of the natural order of things. Every technology form, from an IQ test to an automobile to a television set to a computer, is a product of a particular economic and political context and carries with it a program, an agenda, and a philosophy that may or may not be life enhancing, and that therefore requires scrutiny, criticism, and control. Neil Postman said that in his book, Technopoly. That's worth a consideration as well. So again, that he's basically saying that there's technologies we have now that we just kind of assume have always been a part of the human existence, and that's not true. And the reality of that begs the question then, are we actually bringing to the table ourselves the scrutiny, the criticism, and even the control over the technology that is in our life that's actually due that technology? Or do we just allow it to kind of enter in, for the most part, unchecked, unregulated, and misunderstood to some degree? So what I want to do now is if you guys could get sent into your small groups and just take a pause. Again, that document in there has these two quotes if you need to reference that, but just to pause and give like 3 minutes of reflection to one another on these quotes. What stood out to you? What seems confusing? What's interesting? Maybe what do you not agree with on these two quotes here? I hope that was some interesting conversation to hear, and again, to pause and reflect, because it is one of the things we'll talk about it is how we can cease to reflect well on things that we're consuming or coming into our life. We talked about these. Okay, so I'm going to define some terms here, hopefully in a helpful way. So the tech ethicist Tristan Harris, he makes the claim that and I'll define these because I'll get there in a second. So technology, I'm gonna use it, is going to mean smartphones, computers, social media, streaming services generally. I mean, it can go anywhere from the pen that you're using to a book that you have, right? Like anything that where you're applying some scientific understanding for a practical application to life could be considered technology. But the way I'm going to use it are these areas, which I think most affect our life and have specific implications for our spiritual life, which is why we're talking about this at NavNight. And the reason why, again, we're specifically talking about this definition of technology at NavNight is because of some thoughts that this guy, Tristan Harris, has communicated that I think are helpful. And he identifies these kind of 3 ways why the technology that I just referenced in this generation is specifically different than the different types of technology other generations have experienced. And I think he's generally thinking, print media like newspapers, books, bicycles, TV, radio, some things that do similar, you know, that do similar things to what this technology that we have now does. But what our smartphones, computers, all these things do those things in a very different way. And so the three ways that he says these things are different is, first, that our technology is social in a way that these past ones have not been. It allows us to actually know what our friends are doing, what they're viewing, what they're sharing, what they're engaging with, like technology and radio never did, and still don't in a large degree. Our technology is personalized to each of us, again, in a way that these other ones never did, because of algorithms that are running kind of behind the scenes, especially in social media and in operations like Google, that are watching what we do and how you engage with it, and are keeping us engaged with it. That it actually becomes a participant when we're interacting with this technology. So it's not passively there to be viewed. It is actively trying to draw us back in. The third way that he says that the technology we engage with right now is different than what it has been in the past is that our technology is totalizing, is the word that he uses, almost our entire planet. And what he means by that is that, for instance, in the daily users of Facebook, the statistic that he quotes is close to 2 billion people, which is more than the worldwide adherents of Christianity. And the daily users of YouTube is close to 1.5 billion people, which is more than the worldwide adherents to Islam. So it's not to say that it's not to make the comparison that people have a religious devotion to these social media sites, but it is to say that their reach is incredibly broad across our world. And that is something that is far different than the technology of even just a generation past, let alone multiple generations. So there are significant ways why significant reasons why we need to talk about technology, as I defined it in this conversation, because it has a unique bearing on our life daily, just as humans, let alone believers or people operating in a Christian community. So I think because of all of these things, the technology we're engaging with right now has a capacity to occupy our minds and attentions, and therefore our lives, in a really unprecedented way. So here's kind of the big idea for tonight, is that technology has a real potential to steal your life away from you. And I'm offering maybe a more cautious or stance in this conversation right now. It's not to neglect the good things that technology can do, smartphones, social media, and the like. The reality is, though, that I think that we have to, as Neil Postman was saying, unless we're entering into those spaces of engaging with technology with kind of our guard up and our minds attuned to what's possible there, then we are kind of fooling ourselves and thinking that we're the ones totally in control of those situations. And I think that'll explain why moving forward. So I'm not trying to discount the good that can come from engaging with these things and that has come from engaging with them. But it is to say that the requirement, the prerequisite to engaging with them has to be kind of a solid understanding of how we engage with them, how they're postured in our life. So a quote by William Irvine that maybe says this in a helpful way is that there's a danger that you will mislive, that despite all your activity, despite all the pleasant diversions you might have enjoyed while alive, you will end up living a bad life. There is, in other words, a danger that when you are on your deathbed, you will look back and realize that you wasted your one chance at living. Instead of spending your life pursuing something genuinely valuable, you squandered it because you allowed yourself to be distracted by the various baubles life has to offer. It's a challenging quote, I think. It makes us consider, well, how could we actually get to that point? Like, how would that happen? How would I get to a point of looking back and thinking that I actually squandered my life away? And Jesus has something interesting to say in this idea, in this realm. He says in John's gospel, Jesus says, the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. He goes on to say, I'm the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. He who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees, and the wolf snatches them and scatters them. And maybe some of you have heard me talk about John 10:10, the first part of this quote here often. I found it to be really a profound description of my own relationship with Jesus and the ways that I have sought to pursue and just even trust him in my relationship with him. But going on into what he says here, you begin to see that there are kind of multiple dangers to the life of the sheep. There's the thief that Jesus really explicitly talks about coming to steal and kill and destroy. But there's also even the hired hand, and the negligence of the hired hand becomes a danger to the welfare of the sheep, as well as the wolf who's coming very aggressively towards them. And so you get this kind of picture of what Jesus is talking about, that really the commonality between all of these players in Jesus's discussion here is that the thief and the hired hand and the wolf, the thing that they all have in common is that they view the sheep as a commodity, not as something that deserves love and care. It's a commodity to be used for their own benefit and their own gain. And I think if we're recognizing the words that Jesus is having and taking those seriously, then we should trust that he is talking about our real life now, that there are things such as thief and hired hands and wolves that operate within our world, and we actually may be in contact with them much more often than we think. And their goal, or their at least posture towards us as people in the world, what Jesus is using an analogy to describe us as the sheep, is that they want to use us as a commodity to benefit themselves. So John Mark Comer, an author, says this in his book about hurry. He says, "This is why I harp on technology. At the risk of sounding like an overzealous cult leader with spittle on his beard, like Jordan, or a fundy Luddite with an axe to grind, I fear for the future of the church. There is more at stake here than our attention spans, because what you give your attention to is the person you become." And that's a word of caution, if we'll take it, that what you give your attention to is what you become. And so I wonder, even if you just were to pause, you don't have to right now, but maybe even tonight before bed, and look, you can go into your phone and find your screen time settings and check out, and let that show you even just a piece of what you're giving your attention to. And then to pause and think for a moment, how is that affecting the person that I become? And again, I'm not trying to discredit those. I've looked at social media today. I've engaged with my phone. There are good and needed and helpful things about that for our life. But are we going in with an awareness that what I'm giving my attention to is inevitably affecting the person that I become? So we're going to pause because I want to know if you're still with me. So we're going to pause. And I'm going to ask you to write out, if you have a little piece of paper, or just pause and take a note on your phone. Maybe don't do that. Write on a piece of paper. It's good for you. To write out one thing that has pricked your heart so far, or one thing that has convicted your soul, or one thing that has engaged your mind, and to write it down. And then after you wrote that down, write a name of somebody next to that who you want to share that thought with. I'll give you like 30 seconds to do that. Okay. You could send that in a text. You could send it in an email. You could write them a letter and mail it to them. I don't care. The point is that you're beginning a conversation with somebody about something that has pricked you or convicted or just engaged you in some way so far in this. So this might already seem kind of like depressing, or hopefully it's not too much of a downer for you right now to consider the weightiness of this, but I'm going to tell you it gets worse. Sorry. This is where it's going to go. It's going to go down a little farther, and then it's going to go back up. I promise. Okay. This guy, if you have seen, I watched the documentary on Netflix, The Social Dilemma. And as a friend of mine posted after he watched it, he's like, I'm going to go vegan now. That's kind of the reaction level that I feel like it kind of elicits from somebody's life, is that there's some interesting interesting propositions they're bringing up for sure, and it's definitely worth a watch. But a couple points that I wanted to draw out to give you an idea of, I think, how this affects our life right now. This guy's name, Chamath. He was the former VP of growth for Facebook. And so growth obviously is more people engaging, not just more engagement from the people that are already there, but more people engaging beyond that. And he has some really interesting things to say that essentially are saying, I didn't want to put up a whole nother quote by somebody on here for you to look at and read, but the gist of what he's communicating in this, in one of his clips on there, is that we end up kind of curating a lot of our life around technology and the forms that it offers for us to showcase our life, and getting rewarded for doing that by hearts or likes or thumbs up based on what app you're using. And the problem is, that's not inherently bad in itself, but the problem is that psychologically, just the way our brains work, we conflate that feedback as value, as having a measure of truth to it. And as someone else on the documentary said, a lot of these companies don't have a better proxy for truth than a click. And that, if that is your proxy for what truth is, then of course you're going to position the algorithm of the company itself to gain more of those. And so his position is that that is actually just fake, and it's brittle. It's just about a popularity contest, so to speak, that we create for ourselves, but then after the fact, we go back to it for more, even though it's become wholly unsatisfying to us. And so the danger that he's expressing is that this is inherent to the system. The system is built to trigger this sense of value and truth and wantedness in us, and we allow it to take that place in our life and in our heart. And so we continue to go back to it for more. And obviously that's dangerous. And but seriously though, it gets worse. Sorry. Okay. This guy again on this, Jaron Lanier, who I'm not exactly sure what this means. Some of you probably know, but he's described as the founding father of virtual reality, which sounds like kind of a big deal. So I would be happy to be enlightened about what that means. He goes farther than Chamath to say that he asked the question, well, what are companies like Google and Facebook, some of the most wealthy and by a lot of standards, successful companies that have ever existed, what are they getting paid for? And he says it this way that I think is pretty astounding. He says it's not just it's not just attention. It's the gradual, slight, imperceptible change in your own behavior, and the perception that is the product. Your slight behavior change because of your engagement with these services, that is the product. As he says, it's the only product. There's nothing else on the table that could possibly be called the product. That's the only thing there is for them to make money from. It's not just your attention. It's the fact that your life changes will look different by engaging with their product. And so as the saying goes, if you're not paying for the product, then you are the product, is their statement. And friends, like that's kind of a big deal, right? And I want to emphasize again that like this is not a new concept. Like this idea of people becoming products, this has been part of the human experience for decades, eons, millennia now. So the reality is that even if you looked back in the Old Testament, the Bible portrays this one character, Pharaoh, as defining good in the way that leads to the enslavement of an entire people group, and using these people as a product. And if you look at the history of even the not so distant history of American history and the African slave trade, there are whole systems built up on on making people a product that benefit another group of people. So friends, while this has this might seem a little sci-fi or like Matrix-like with all these people and these like little embryo sacs just being harvested by robots. Like this is more real to our human condition and the reality of what it means to be human and live in this world than I think we often realize. And so to realize that now there is a new form where you're vulnerable to being exploited in these ways, that's worth taking seriously. And so I'm honestly saying this out of a heart of love for you and the potential concern of what could happen if you don't take this seriously, because I recognize the implications for both just myself, but I also recognize it for my family, for my kids, for our neighbors, that if I am continually being used as a product for others, then that's terrible. That not only degrades my humanity, but that whittles away my influence in their life too. So I recognize this can begin to feel pretty overwhelming, especially when it doesn't feel like there's an option to live in a world without this technology, because it is so ingrained. And that maybe can be one of the most disheartening aspects of this topic, is that because we're operating in a world that is so totally ingrained with this, that it's hard to think about how to get out of it, right? Okay, I want you to pause again real quick and write down just one emotion you're feeling right now. On your paper or wherever you had those, write down one emotion you've had right now. And if there's been a thought in your mind of something that you feel compelled to do in light of something we've already talked about, then write that down too. Because I would venture to guess that while I've been talking and trying to lay some of this groundwork out there, that maybe for some of you, there's already been something that has come to mind that is sparking some sort of action step in you. And I would want you to pay attention to that. So I think the way out, to give the Sunday school answer, is Jesus, but there's a posture that I think to take in that, that is directly related to the posture that technology is trying to position itself towards in our life. So we're going to run Matthew 11, 28 through 30. Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." And I want you to recognize something that's really important, I think often missed in this passage. This is probably not the first time you've heard this passage quoted. Anytime where somebody's feeling tired, they usually go to this passage, I think. But what does Jesus offer to the people who are weary and burdened, right? Burdened like you're carrying something, where you've been working or struggling or toiling towards something. And he offers a yoke. That's a yoke was the wooden crosspiece that they used to join two oxen or load-bearing animals together to do work. And I heard one commentator say, like, why isn't he offering a mattress? Like, here, you're burdened. Here, take a nap. That's not what he's offering. So this, like, get that, right? That's what Jesus is saying. I don't think I'm making that up. I don't think the other commentator is making that up. Like, Jesus is offering us essentially a piece of equipment for labor that's used for labor. So what are the implications of that? And how does that actually help us to experience rest? I think it's because what he's saying is that the way that I can help you live life is easy. The way that you have been living life under these other yokes, under these other burdens, that is not easy. Jesus is not offering a mattress to help us to escape from the world that we currently live in. Jesus is offering us a new way to live in it that redefines us as humans and gives us the rest and the light burden that we were made to carry, not the oppressive, slave driving, product-driven life that the institutions of the world have created for us and then sold to us and made us a product for. So if that is true, if what Jesus says here is true, and I think it is fairly plain as we look at it there, then the question for our life is, what remember the quote before, what I give my attention to is the person I will become. I think the obvious application or the obvious question that is put to us by Jesus here is, will you give your attention to me? Will you come to me, as he says here? That seems to be the prerequisite to finding rest for your souls. So I would offer to you that if you are feeling burdened, if you're feeling weary, and if you can honestly kind of take a step back and recognize how much of that may be due to the technology that is present in our life, then I would offer to you that I think the solution is learning to come to Jesus, maybe in some new ways, or maybe for the first time, or maybe with others in a way that you haven't before. Because I think that his promise and his promise of a yoke that is easy and light is true. So I'm going to give you, again, just 30 seconds to write down if there's any other reflection thoughts. I'm not going to guide that in any way, just to give you a moment to reflect on that and to write down if there's something that you want to capture from that thought. Okay. Remember, starting on if you're not following so I'm going to go directly into talking about our social media feed, because it's a helpful way for us to communicate. So if you have a follow-up question that you would like discussed to have us discuss on our podcast this next week, then there'll be an opportunity to post that through our Instagram. And so the point of that is to try to create this as a community discussion, to have you be able to engage into this conversation, and so that we can actually be speaking to you as our primary audience for that podcast. It's not about just becoming known or bigger. It's about finding effective and helpful ways to serve and love you as a community. So that's that. I don't know who I'm kicking it to. I think Jordan, maybe. Yeah. Before I do that, I'm going to pray. Actually, I should do that. That's a good thing to do. Sorry. Jesus, you indeed do want to give us a light yoke, a burden that is easy for our life, and your invitation is to come. So I pray for clarity as we look at our lives. I pray that you would help us to see the effect that technology has had on them, and the ways that we have even been malformed into a likeness that represents the world rather than your likeness. And so, Jesus, I ask for your help in that, and I ask for your strength in the lives of my friends here to have wisdom to grasp that, and humility and honesty enough to come to you as they need to. I pray these things in your name, Jesus. Amen.